Welcome to this week's edition of Conversations. This week we're going to be talking about Luke chapter 12, 35 through Luke chapter 13, verse 9. I want to point out something to you here as we get into this section. And that simply is, this is in fact a conversation that Jesus is having with others. You'll notice in verse 41 of this section that Peter asked Jesus a question. He wants some clarification on a particular issue. And in chapter 13 and verse 1, the crowd mentions something to him, and Jesus takes the opportunity to respond to what they mentioned to him. It's good. Conversation is what was happening there, and I think us having conversations about it is good as well. It helps us learn things if we're willing to listen. My title this week is Ready, Set, Go. And I really mean in that, be watchful, be aware, and adjust. Maybe that's a way for you to think about it. First of all, be watchful. There's a great sense of anticipation that Jesus builds in this particular section. He tells his disciples, you have to be ready. You have to be like a servant waiting for his master to come back from a wedding. You don't know when he's going to come, but you have to be ready when he comes. And so there's a certain anticipation that Jesus is building up. And he may have in mind here his second coming, which the disciples really don't know a whole lot about just yet. But the point is, of course, be watchful, be ready, fulfill your assigned responsibilities. And Jesus will go on to say, look, don't be like a servant who abuses his position. Stay watchful, do the right thing, fulfill your responsibilities in that. Then he says, I think, or at least I'm taking this to mean, be aware. And in so doing, Jesus, I think, is telling us some things here that he wants us to be aware of about his coming and about what he's doing. And the first thing he mentions is that, his teachings are going to be a little bit divisive. And that doesn't necessarily sound great to us, but his teachings really do break with many of the norms of society. And thus, by his own admission, some of those things are going to divide people. They're going to create tension among groups, among people who are very close, friends, family, neighbors, etc. And so he wants us to be aware of that. Then he kind of challenges some people in his group for being very aware of how to predict the weather. And we've taken that in our day and age to another whole level with all of our technology and radars and stuff. And, we can do a pretty good job of it, at least, figuring out what's going to be even in the next 10 days, somewhat what the weather's going to be like, though it may change somewhat. But he tells people, look, you can be good at that, but still miss really, really important things. And specifically, I think he's talking about the things related to his own coming and just what he's trying to do with trying to teach them some things. And then he tells people, you better settle up quickly with your accusers. Now that may sound a little bit out of context. At least it kind of did to me at first till I stopped to think about it. I don't think Jesus is just talking about, settle things out of court quickly, although not a bad thing to do if it's really a serious matter. But I think he's telling us something about, think about your predicament. And specifically, think about your predicament with God, because I think that's the whole impact of this. Because next, Jesus is going to tell people they all need to repent. And so when you're in a predicament, you take care of it quickly. So that moves quickly into chapter 13, where Jesus is having a discussion, and apparently some people mention to him something that has happened recently, and that is Pilate has mixed some blood of certain people, and he killed them obviously first, and then he mixed some of their blood with his sacrifices. And Jesus takes the occasion here, whether or not the people he's discussing with have this in mind, he takes the occasion here to say, look, you think it's because they were really bad sinners? Specifically, do you think they were worse than you or anybody else living in Jerusalem because they suffered at the hands of this evil maniac? The fact is, Jesus says, no, that's not the case. You all have to repent at this. That's your predicament. And then, of course, he even takes it a step further, and he talks about a tower that apparently fell, at least in recent memory of those listening to him. And he says, you think because they suffered this accident that they also were worse sinners? And he says, no, they're no worse than you. You're no better than them. Unless you all repent, you will all perish. Later on, one of Jesus' followers will say it this way: all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Fortunately, in this, there's a little bit of good news here, and that is Jesus tells this parable about the fig tree. And I think what he's saying there is, God is always willing to give people a second chance. And so that perhaps is the best thing for us to think about here. Our second chance. Are we willing to take that second chance, realize our predicament, and repent and come back to God? Think about that as you talk about Luke chapters 12 and 13 this week. And thank you for joining us once again.